Kids should be bored. Maybe above all else, kids should have time to be bored. It's a formative function of brain health and synchronizing everything that they're taking in throughout the day. They're like absorbent little sponges, and they need that time and space to be distracted, bored, let their mind wander. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Well for Culture podcast. This is your host, Chelsea. And today I have a really good episode for you all about how and why to parent without screen time. And I'm going to tell you about my balanced approach to limiting screen time use for my 7-year-old and my 4-year-old. This is a health and wellness issue because it is the issue of our time. I feel super grateful that I was born in 87. I was a kid of the 90s, pretty much the last generation to be raised without Kindles and wireless internet and social media and all that stuff that is continuing to harm the brain health, the mental health, and all aspects of well-being for our children, for this generation and for future generations to come. So this is a new issue. It's something that we have the responsibility of figuring out as parents of this era, and it's something that we should take very, very seriously. It's also something that I've been through a lot of trial and error with, and I can tell you a little bit more about that. But I just want to start off by saying that there's no judgment here. If you are in a position where you do feel that your children's screen time has been out of control or excessive, it's never too late to make a change. It's never too late to experiment, try something new, figure out a new habit or schedule for your family that works. And again, my approach is a balanced approach. I allow a little bit of screen time for my kids, and I'll tell you more in a little bit about what that looks like. So again, just an overview, my kids are 4 and 7, and at these ages, their brains are in a critical stage of development. Everything that they do in their days at this period of life is going to set them up for having an attention span, for him being able to learn, for establishing healthy habits, for what they're comfortable doing throughout their day. And if the screen is a constant crutch for them now, it's only going to become a worse and worse issue as they age. Think of those of us who were introduced to screens initially, like 10 years ago, and already how addicted we are. I feel like a bionic woman sometimes because my phone is constantly by my side, and it's a habit that I'm constantly trying to break. Now with the influx of AI approaching era of, whatever kind of virtual reality headsets and experiences are going to become just the norm, everything is going to be more and more integrated. The temptations, the addictions are only going to become more severe if tech companies continue to be let loose with how they roll out these products. And so it's really, really up to us in a grassroots way as parents to decide whether our children are living in the real world or whether they are living in technology. Why do I want my kids to live in the real world? Why is that so important to me? Well, if that's not obvious, we're Indigenous people. It's a value of ours. It's a tradition of ours. It's our heritage. It's our birthright to be connected to the land, to know who we are. To know who we are is to know where we are, where we stand. And if we're constantly on a screen, we're completely disconnected from the world around us. To be who we are is to be in community, in personal connection, eye contact, physical touch with the people around us who love us. And so it's so important, if we want to continue our traditions, to establish a world for our children where they are comfortable being in the real world. And if they're addicted to screens, they are not comfortable with that. So this is really critical in terms of Indigenous cultural revitalization, in terms of the well-being of future generations. So that's the Indigenous perspective for me as a parent, the cultural perspective. But of course, it's everything else that I mentioned. Brain health, cognitive health, attention spans, ability to learn and get through a day in school, establishing a more fulfilled life for my kids. This is why it's so important. Kids should be moving, singing, dancing, playing, running around. Kids should be bored. Maybe above all else, kids should have time to be bored. It's a formative function of brain health and synchronizing everything that they're taking in throughout the day. They're like absorbent little sponges, and they need that time and space to be distracted, bored, let their mind wander. And again, if they're constantly in this zone of YouTube and screen time and touch screens, everything just turns to chaos and they lose that silence that they need in order to establish themselves and root themselves in the real world. So that's why this is a wellness issue. That's why this is a public health issue. And it's why it's something that I am so passionate about. And I consider this a discussion. I think I'm learning every day about how to navigate these things with my kids. I don't think I'm the ultimate expert or the perfect person or the perfect parent when it comes to this stuff. I do know that I have established some really good tips and techniques over time that have worked pretty well for my kids and for my family. So let's talk about it. So this is my balanced approach. And my husband and I have worked to kind of figure this out and establish this over the years. So the general rule that we have established that seems to be working pretty well for us is that we allow screen time only on the weekends. We also allow it every so often when it's not the weekend, if we're like really, really in a pinch. Like one of us absolutely has to sit down and give a presentation on Zoom. That's a big part of our job. Or, one of us absolutely needs to sit down and take a phone call or a meeting. But those are, we really try to reserve the non-weekend screen time for emergencies. And it doesn't happen very often. And when we do allow that screen time on the weekend, we're very particular about what that is. The first thing is that the device matters. What we've learned over the years in experimenting, there was a short period of time where my mom and my stepdad bought the two girls each their own Kindle. So we did experiment for a little while with allowing them each to sit and watch their own show on a Kindle. Well, we realized pretty quickly that the touchscreen function was a disaster for our toddler. I mean, it was almost an instant shift in her mood. She became fussy. She became irritable. She would start hitting it and just didn't have the patience or the wherewithal to handle that much stimulation and to handle having that much control over it. So this was when she was about 2 years old, and that didn't last very long. She hasn't been able to use a Kindle or any other kind of touchscreen since. And I feel really good about that decision. Now, our older daughter was a little bit older when she was gifted her Kindle. And she was at an age where she already had established a lot more ability to emotionally regulate. Her temperament was more even-keeled. She had self-regulation skills that allowed her to interact with that touch screen in a less chaotic way. Now she's 8, or about to be 8. We still allow her to use her Kindle from time to time, but again, it's very limited. Even within that weekend window, she'll maybe be allowed the touch screen for 2 to 3 hours at the most. So again, device matters. The format of the screen time matters. And one thing that they're never allowed is a phone. We're not going to buy them phones until they are, 16 years old and they can get a job and pay for their own phone bill. Or we might buy them some form of like a children's safety phone. But as far as a smartphone, not going to happen for a very long time, probably after high school. They do not have free reign or access to our phones as their parents. We don't keep games for them or anything on our phones. It's, in my mind, if you establish that relationship where they feel like they can have access to your technology, they're just going to constantly ask for it, and it's going to encroach upon both of your lifestyles, and you're going to end up giving in so much more often than you would have wanted to. So I recommend zero tolerance with allowing kids access to your own personal phone. So what's the other choice? Sometimes we will sit them down together in front of we have a large screen desktop computer upstairs in the office. In my mind, if they're gonna be watching a movie, it may as well be something that they do together as siblings, just like we all did growing up. The other thing I do is I'll give them each a little notebook and a pen or color crayons, and I'll tell them to take notes or draw pictures about what they're seeing while they watch. So that way they have a little bit of touching grass in the real world, so to speak, while they're also watching the screen. Little things like that, or hand them a little, container of Play-Doh or something where they're kind of like using their hands while the TV then becomes something that's more in the background. That tends to work well for keeping them emotionally regulated and, in tune while watching a movie. We don't have a TV in our living area. That's another conscious choice that we've made. I just don't like having TVs and stuff like that as background noise or as the focal point in a living space. I'll talk a lot more about that when I get into more of my sacred space episodes. For that reason, we keep all of our technology kind of quartered into the office, and that tends to be where they'll sit and watch a shared screen. But if you do have a TV, obviously in your living room, I mean, that would be the obvious choice, is to use that. But, have the kids sit down and make sure to not have that TV constantly on as background noise. I think that everybody in the family, regardless of age, should think of the TV as something that is minimal use throughout the day, something that you're truly actually paying attention to and getting something out of if you are going to turn it on. For health and wellness reasons, whether we're adults or children, we shouldn't be just flipping through channels, listening to the noise of commercials and stuff like that. We should really be more focused on watching shows that are enriching, satisfying, truly going to make us laugh or feel something or give us a compelling story. TV and film have immense purpose in that way. TV and film can be art, can be fulfilling aspects of life if we approach it correctly and with limitations. So for kids, content matters. I always look for entertainment that is story-driven, that has a plot with a moral, that has well-developed characters, good music, and something that moves at a slower pace. What I strictly do not allow my kids to watch is stuff like toy unboxings on YouTube, or those videos where you're just like watching other children play. There's all kinds of like weird, to me, it's creepy YouTube content that is just wildly, wildly popular, where it's absolutely mind numbing for anyone to watch, but especially an impressionable child. I would avoid those things at all costs. There's a reason why kids are so addicted to these shows. It's a way of completely tuning out and shutting off their brain. And I just don't think it's healthy. So I avoid that sort of like mindless entertainment. And obviously I avoid and very carefully monitor anything that might be inappropriate, that might be more blatantly inappropriate or not right for their age groups. But the other thing you have to watch for is there's a lot of shows on, Netflix or Disney that are super, super fast moving, fast paced, intense animation. And these are shows that are catered to small children. One of the most famous examples being Cocomelon. And if you look online, there's all kinds of videos where they just show how quickly the scenes change and how bright the colors are and how like the cadence of the music. And there's every aspect of that show. It's almost like sugar in TV form. Again, if you're a parent, you've probably seen how your child reacts to a show like that, and it's not good. They get very high strung. They get very irritable. The same way that we feel when we watch that show. It's not pleasant to have on in the background. And so avoid shows like that. what do we choose instead? Well, we have a few favorites that I actually really enjoy, and so do my kids. Classical Baby on HBO is a series that I recommend checking out. I think it was produced in the 90s. It's a mix of like animation with classical music, and it teaches about art, music, poetry. Each episode has a different theme. It's really slow paced, slow moving, and they actually relax when they watch it. And it's also, there's so few like words that it's really music and art driven. That's one that I highly recommend. Speaking of entertainment that's very like music and visual driven, there's a fairly new movie called Flow. I also recommend watching that. It has like no dialogue, but a very beautiful story and plot. Definitely recommend that one for all ages. Any Studio Ghibli films, famous Japanese animator. My kids really love My Neighbor Totoro, which is one of his most famous movies. Worthy, worthy films, beautiful music, and we just love the stories. As far as shorter form cartoons, PBS Kids tends to be very educational or eduvocational, as my 4-year-old says. We especially love Molly of Denali, story about an indigenous girl from Alaska. And then there's a show called Lakota Bears on, I think, co-produced by PBS, but you can find it on YouTube. It's episodes of the Berenstain Bears cartoons, all in the Lakota language. So whatever tribal nation you're from, or if you're from another country, you have a different heritage, I recommend seeking cartoons and content that is maybe filmed in your language or the language you want your kids to learn. So those are just a few of our recommendations as far as what we allow our kids to watch. And then of course there's, plenty of other shows. Like my 8-year-old is really into a lot of different anime series right now. Those ones are kind of like tricky with some of the content can be a little bit mature even when they're rated for young children. So you have to kind of watch and make sure that it's appropriate. And then my 4-year-old loves a lot of like the Disney movies and stuff like that. And we especially, prefer, some of them have better content than others and better stories than others. But when it's limited and when they're only getting a few hours on the weekends, I think there's no harm in letting them watch a little something. Last night, for example, my husband just got home from a hunting trip. He had been gone for a long time. The kids were actually, usually they get their screen time on the weekends. I grounded them from it because they had been hitting each other and fighting. And that's like the main rule in our house, no hitting, of course. So I said, okay, even though it's the weekend, we're not doing any screen time. So when my husband got back on Monday, and then today's Veterans Day, it's not a school night. So we made a big exception to the rule. We're like, we're going to do a family movie night. He set up the projector. We watched Elio, I think. And it was like a new film about aliens, which my husband is like super into. And so are the girls. And it was nice. Like when we all get together, we really focus as a family. My husband and I are not on our phones. We're all comfy. We have our snacks. Like, I think movie nights are really sweet and really fun when you make it a big family event. And again, you're robbing yourself of the ability to do that and to make it this big fun experience and formative experience if you're constantly allowing it. Like it doesn't become a treat anymore. So I recommend, in those moments when these limitations feel difficult to place, in these moments where you're stressed and you just want to like put them on a screen and get them out of your hair, really try to think about the long-term payoff as opposed to the short-term reward. So context always matters for this stuff. Like I said, you can set up a really special family movie night. You can have it so that your kids and you all feel the specialness of that with its rarity. But if you're using it constantly as a crutch at every moment, it takes away all the magic. So a few of the places where we are highly restrictive with screen time is cars and food. We never have allowed portable devices in the car, especially on the way to or from school. And I know that there are times where I've been dropping my kids off at their school and I see kids like this as they pull up, and then they're getting out and it's like a fight. And I just imagine, gosh, every day those parents, have to go through making sure they have devices and charged and they're turning everything on. I mean, just an extra step with the already chaotic process of getting your kids through that transition from home to school. You don't want them to think of that as a crutch or something that they have constant privilege and access to, because it actually makes your life and their lives more difficult in the long run. It makes those transitional moments, which are already moments of heightened emotion for kids, it makes it that much more difficult. It's very jarring, and kids actually go through a withdrawal when their screens are being taken away. And so never set them up for a circumstance where the screen is a given in the car. It should never be in the car at all, unless it's a very special circumstance, like maybe a long road trip, if road trips are relatively rare for your family. But if road trips are common for your family, even then I would say avoid the screens in the car altogether. So the other one I mentioned is with food. Mindful eating is one of the most important aspects of a healthy, well-rounded relationship to food. Adults and children should not be on phones, computers, touch screens while eating. It completely eliminates the opportunity to eat mindfully, which means to pay attention to your food, to have gratitude for your food, to properly chew and digest, and to eat slowly, and to be present with your food and with your company and even with yourself. So I highly recommend never getting into a circumstance where it becomes the norm for your kid to have the iPad in front of their face while they're eating, because that's going to set them up for a lifetime of challenges when it comes to nutrition and healthy eating habits. So the other thing is that time of day actually matters. There's a whole area of wellness called circadian health that I've been studying a lot lately and really interested in. And it's just the idea that our circadian rhythms impact a lot more than just a healthy sleeping schedule or sleeping habit. Circadian rhythm is one of the most important, deeply human components of health, something that our ancestors had down perfectly because they were waking up with the sun and going to sleep with the sunset on a daily basis. Today, with the interference of screen time and blue light, our schedules are not dictated by the sun and the moon, the stars anymore. Our schedules are just dictated by whatever we want, because we have ways to keep ourselves awake and functioning at all hours with all kinds of different artificial lights. But even though we have access to that, should we take advantage of that access? Or should we try to get closer to a place of an ancestral circadian rhythm once again? So my recommendation when you do allow kids screen time, so for us, it's Saturdays and Sundays, we offer the screen when the sun is at its brightest. Because when the sun is at its brightest, that's when they're meant to be awake and hyperactive anyway. That's when the earth is telling you to be awake and active and, out and about. And so having access to a blue light screen at that time of day is not going to be nearly as disruptive to their circadian rhythms as it is if you give that screen time access right before they're supposed to fall asleep when it's nighttime, or right when they wake up in the morning. So I recommend midday, when the sun is highest in the sky, to give them access to those devices. Early mornings, experiment with this, especially if it's fairly nice outside. This morning, my little one, Weston, and we woke up at the same time. We went straight downstairs. I started making my coffee and I said, "Come outside with me, Weston. Let's say good morning to the morning." And it's just amazing to watch. Her eyes literally sparkle and glow as she looks around and she notices how beautiful it is. Just noticing the trees and the birds and the sky. There's something really special about the morning light. And this is something that's not just felt personally by me, but this is also really well studied. It's important for us to have access to morning light. Through a window is okay, but much better if you can even step outside. They recommend 2 to 10 minutes at the minimum for a healthy circadian rhythm. And so give yourself access to that. Give your kids access to that. Don't waste away those precious morning minutes in the world of screens. Take yourself outside, take your kids outside, and it becomes a really special time of day. Same with the evenings. We're very intentional about lowering any artificial lights in our home. We have a bunch of lamps around that have like orange light bulbs in them as opposed to bright white lights. And those are even less disruptive than, a screen with blue light. So again, unless it's a rare occasion, like the family movie night on the projector I just described to you, I would avoid screen time at night as well, even though that seems a little bit counterintuitive because I think a lot of us think of evening and nighttime as TV watching time. I think for children, it should be more of a midday activity. And if you are in a place where you're allowing it on school days, I recommend giving it right after school and then shutting it off at least a few hours before bedtime, because that's going to allow their brains to calm down, for their eyes to start registering evening light. And that triggers melatonin and prepares them for rest. And kids, the younger they are, the more sleep they need. So time of day matters a lot for screen time and kids. And keep those tips in mind. Now, I suppose some of you might be wondering, what do we do when we're not on screens? Like, how do I occupy them is the question. And the first thing that I would challenge you to do is to turn that question around and to say to yourself, they don't need to be occupied. They don't need to be given a task or an event or an entertainment at all times. Kids should have time to be bored. Kids need boredom for their health, for their development, for their ability to connect to those around them, to the ideas that they're learning, to be able to synthesize everything that they're taking in. Kids need to be bored. Let them be bored. Let them complain. Find ways for yourself to put up with the discomfort of that. Remember your own childhood. That was all we had. And take the time to explain to them why it's good for them. They'll get it. They'll understand. I talk to my kids about this stuff all the time. Even if they seem like they're too young to really get it, they do. They really start to comprehend these ideas. So allow boredom. Don't worry about constantly having them occupied. But of course, there are so many things that they can do, and they'll figure it out on their own. And sometimes you can guide them toward figuring it out. But art, water, outdoor play, movement, exercise, imaginary play, books, drawing. There's so many things that kids can do. Again, the more that they're on those screens, the less of that other beautiful, wonderful, colorful stuff they're going to have in their childhood and as part of their formative memories. And you want to remember that you're setting them up for everything else they'll go on to do in life. Do you want to be a person that never reads, that never paints or draws, or, sits down for a long discussion? Do you want to be a person that just always relies on a flipping screen? I don't think that that's what we want for ourselves or for our kids. So set them up for that now, figuring out what to do without the screens. This morning, we woke up, and after we did our little outdoors, I brought the girls inside, and we happened to have, somebody gave us from the girls' school these blank canvases, and then we happened to have some paints, washable Crayola paints and paintbrushes. So I set it out on their easel, and I said, okay, Weston, you're going to do a daylight painting, and Aloe, you're going to do a nighttime sky. And I gave them each the appropriate colors that they would need, and I sat with them and I turned on some Spanish guitar music, and so I guided them a little bit. And meanwhile, Thosh is cooking breakfast. It was just such a fun couple of hours, kind of in and out, watching them do their little paintings, but also allowing them to do it themselves and seeing what they came up with. Those are the kind of mornings that you can have without screens. Okay, so another tip is how you keep their playroom, their toys, living room, wherever their toys live, their toys and their art supplies, how you keep those organized is going to make a big difference in their ability to independently play and access those things, those activities on their own. Organization is really important. When we have too much stuff going on around us, our brains become crippled with indecision. And that's only exacerbated if you are a little tiny developing mind. So that's why it's such a common trope where you hear parents go, "Oh my God, you have so many toys. How could you possibly be bored?" Well, I think that's exactly why. It's because they have so many that they're overwhelmed. They don't know which one to choose. So, first of all, we need to really limit how many toys we're acquiring and bringing into the house. Toys are not the key to a child's happiness. Imagination is the key to a child's happiness. So, when we limit their toys, they're forced and required to utilize their imagination to get more out of the toys that they have. I think that everybody should have a maximum of maybe 1 or 2 toy boxes, and the toys should not be overflowing and spilling out onto the floor and all over the closets and under the beds. If your toys are spilling out beyond that 1 toy box, it's time to do a clean out and include your kids in that process. My kids and I do it every few months. We sit down and we declutter and we decide, what can we give away? What do we really need to keep? And they have an opinion, and I listen to them. And so that's how we kind of keep those collections to a minimum. Same with art supplies. We have 1 box of crayons, about that big, crayons and markers, and they're always in the same place. And there's a little couple of kids' scissors in there and a ruler and other things that they might need. And so my kids always know exactly where to go to get their crayons and their colors. And then right underneath that, we have a wooden box where we have all of their coloring books and pens or not pens, coloring books and papers and drawing pads. And so they know where to go and how to set themselves up for an art activity. I don't have to set it up for them every time. Those make a big difference in a child's ability to occupy themselves, is keeping the entertainment items limited and organized. So you know where it is, they know where it is, and then it makes cleanup easier too. So how you have your kids' stuff arranged and even little things like up in my bedroom, I have a huge bookshelf. It fills up the whole wall. Well, all my books are, of course, on the higher shelves for safety purposes and for ease of access for me. And all my kids' books are on the bottom 2 shelves. That way they can go and grab a book whenever they want it. And they know exactly where their books are. The board books are on the bottom. The larger books are on the second shelf. The chapter books are over here. And so keeping those systems in place is going to make your life a lot easier. Yeah, every so often you have to go back in and restructure it and redo it because it will become a mess at some point, but it's worth it. It's a very worthy effort because when you are organized, your house is organized, your kids can play independently because they know where to go and how to get something out for themselves. And with that organization, again, they're a lot less overwhelmed with choice. They're more able to just say, okay, I only have really a couple of options. What am I going to do? I can decide. And for a small mind, that's a really big deal to be able to make that decision. So last but not least, let's just talk about those benefits once again of limiting screen time. Emotional regulation. You'll notice a big difference in your kids. I love that Monday through Friday, I'm not being asked constantly, when do I get to watch? When do I get to see a movie? Can I have my Kindle? I don't have to deal with it because it's just habit at this point. They know, weekdays, no screens. Weekends, little bit of screens. I don't have to deal with the constant pulling them off and on the screen and dealing with the chaos of that transition. I just eliminate that for 5 days out of the week. And that makes my life and their lives a lot easier and a lot less stressed. Better learning as well in school. Ability to pay attention. My kids, they get really good remarks from their teachers as far as their ability to pay attention, their ability to focus. And I really think that any kid can be that way if screen time is limited and if they're put in circumstances where their imagination is allowed to run wild and where their brains are allowed to also be calm. So it helps them in school. It helps their attention span. And again, it fosters a love for the arts, for books, for outdoor play. It sets them up for a life where there is so much more going on than just whatever is going on online. And as they approach those adolescent and teenage years, this becomes not only something that's good to have, but it becomes a crutch. It becomes necessary for their mental health. And you can look this up, study after study, example after example. Kids that are allowed too much social media too early, and it wreaks incredible havoc on their mental health. So we need to protect our children from that circumstance. And again, we also need to set them up for a life, a fulfilled life doing many other things. The bottom line is you're making your own job more difficult, and you're actually making your children's lives more difficult if you allow constant, unbridled access to screen time. And I know that sounds harsh, but it's the truth. And so I wanted to state that plainly. For your children's wellness, for your mental health, for the whole family well-being, we need to take these issues very, very seriously. No more iPad kids. No more screen time as a crutch. While there are short-term rewards in them being occupied by this stuff for a little while, the long-term negatives far outweigh what you're getting with those short-term rewards. So make the effort, make the change, and let's reel in that screen time for a healthier future for our kids. Now, as we know, at the end of every episode, I like to read a little quote. Usually it's somewhat related to the topic I just discussed. Today, my quote comes from Fool's Crow, Wisdom and Power, a book that is super important to me. It says, "The past is constantly linked to the present, and both of these are linked to the future in that they are future-oriented and make the future possible. They cause the people to think in terms of providing for it. Whenever the hoop is drawn or a ritual takes place in a circle, all three ages are included in it. Fool's Crow said to me, 'Our children are us in the tomorrow of life. In them we remain here, and so it will be with their children's children, if the world survives.'" I think that's very poignant. I think it's very related, this intergenerational concept of everything that we are fostering and creating and establishing for our kids now is not only bringing in the past and our ancestral teachings, but it's setting them up for their beautiful futures and for the future of this world. And the question of if this world survives was one that was on this medicine person, Fool's Crow's mind. And it's one that's on our minds today with the advent of all kinds of, potentially destructive technologies and chaos in this world. So let's create a space of calm. Let's create a space of connection for our kids. And I think that that's how we give them a good life. It's often not what we're providing and giving and buying and offering them, but maybe it's the limitations that we place, the quietness that we establish that gives them the chance to develop into healthy, happy, capable human beings. Thank you guys so much for listening. We will be back soon with another episode.